English translation, 343rd. Contact, Tuesday, 3rd June 2003, 22.51 hours.
Hello, my friend. Nice to be in your ship once again.
Be welcomed, my dear friend. For my part, too, there is joy. And since you just passed by in the garage parking lot, I thought I could beam you up into my flying apparatus, which I did because I want to talk to you regarding yesterday's incident.
What do you mean about the recent attack? It was the 21st.
That is what I speak of. Your assumption is of correctness.
Aha, and how do you know that? Is that why you came here?
Actually, that is why I am here, but also because of the thing with Hans Georg, because I have not heard anything more about that since I gave advice through Florena. And that I know about the new assassination attempt of yesterday afternoon is because Florena called up the monthly data on the monitoring disk in the early hours of the morning, although the incident was, of course, not hidden from her.
I see. Then you probably know the exact time and circumstances when and from where the shot was fired at me, no? For my part, I guess it must have been at 16:15 HRs, because when I looked at the wristwatch some time after the incident, it was 16:20 HRs. But tell me, was it you at 22:15 HRs? There I was, about 35 minutes ago, standing with Silvano in front of the house entrance and watching the starry sky together with him, which was partly covered by dark veiled clouds, which floated very slowly at about 2,000 meters altitude. Suddenly, a brightly shining flying object appeared from the west. Shining orange-yellow like a small Bengali fire of about 15–18 centimeters in size, it pulled slowly towards the east, whereby the glow seemed to pulsate. Once it got into one of the black-veiled clouds, whereby the radiating light was weakened somewhat, but only to shine immediately again in full strength. For about 1–2 minutes, we could observe the object before it disappeared far to the east. For my part, I called telepathically and hoped that it was one of you, but received no answer.
That was actually me, but I was so busy with my equipment that I could not answer you, although I received your impulses. My work was related to the tracking of an impulse track that I had found in the center behind the camper at the edge of the forest. You were shot from the left camper corner at 16:16 TERS.
So then I was not all that wrong about the time. Have you had a review?
Yes, because it was necessary. Through that I saw that you, as often before, were unusually lucky. When you went around the corner of the house, you looked to the right, where you apparently observed the growth of the trees. So you walked about 4 meters and suddenly turned your head to the left, which undoubtedly saved your life, because at that very moment the shot was fired at you.
That is how I also see it. When I turned my head, I saw something red on the wall of the house on the left, so I immediately looked at it, at a box of bright red flowers that Eva had planted there. I heard the bullet whiz past my skull. It sounded like a soft psst. Then I heard the bang, which apparently emanated from a small caliber rifle that must have loaded a powerful cartridge. In a flash, I bent down and dashed away like a greased lightning bolt, ran back around the corner of the house and into the house, where I recovered from the shock and my knees began to shake. As before, I sensed no warning, so I was not prepared for the shot. Why I felt nothing, I do not know. Is it perhaps possible that this was related to my headaches, which for days have not let go of me due to the coding of the spiritual teaching?
Your assumption might be correct, because headaches affect concentration. But because of the gunshot, the bullet hit a protruding stone in a paved stone arch, causing a piece about 3 centimeters long and about the same thickness to splinter off and be hurled away. So you will not be able to find the bullet when you are looking for it.
We have already established that, That means Silvano and I looked for a bullet hole in the leaves of the bushes because we thought the bullet hit somewhere there. Then Bernadette came along, who then found the place with the splintered stone and an additional bullet scratch mark in the stone arch you mentioned, which, by the way, Volodya built in Kurgan. And what I still want to say, in the upstairs apartment there was Maria who came running down to ask what was wrong. Engelbert, on the other hand, was working downstairs in the chicken yard. He also came running up because he heard the rather loud bang of the shot. He then searched all around, all the way into the woods, but he could not find anything or anyone. The shooter, maybe also a female shooter, had disappeared without a trace as usual. Ava was at the time with Selina in therapy, and Silvano was also out of town, because he had something to do down in the valley. So he and Eva joined us later. Then today at noon, around 13:30 HRs, we got another phone call. At first I thought Silvano would answer it because he was in the house, and I was in the square outside with Ava and Selina. But since he was obviously not around, I ran to the phone and unseared it. I heard a man's voice with a very foreign German accent that was unknown to me. They only said a short sentence, "We will catch you after all, you bastard." Then they hung up. But tell me, when you flew so low over our center at 22:15 hours tonight, how high was your altitude? Silvano asked me, so I told him that I estimated an altitude of about 1,800 to 2,000 meters.
Then you guessed well. The altitude was 2,000 meters.
Then I have another question. Why, then, does one not see the light of the ship, or the ships at all in the size that the ship is, or the ships are? The light should appear much bigger, I think. I have wanted to ask this for a long time, but I have always forgotten.
Of course, the glow extends over the whole flying apparatus, as you know from experience, since you could make your observations from very close range. But if the flying apparatus is more than 280 meters above the ground, then the entire light energy is automatically bundled in such a wise that only a small area of visibility is created, which for observers at nighttime makes the flying apparatus appear only like a larger star. This technique is based on a safety measure against biased observers who think they see only one star. From this point of view, it is usually not noticed that the apparent star is moving.
Why biased observers?
Regarding our directives that we should not make ourselves noticeable and not openly make ourselves visible to human populations, which themselves are not yet capable of actual space travel and have not yet become really human.
Then you could completely shield yourselves so that no light from your ships can be seen at night. Your technology is so advanced that there should be no problems for you in this respect.
That would be possible for us, of course. But then we would have to shield our flying apparatuses against any visibility, which brings the disadvantage for us that in this state of the flying apparatuses, we can no longer perform certain locating activities.
You mean that if your ships are invisible to the human eye, as well as to radar beams, etc., then, if I understand correctly, certain tracking activities from the ships will be affected?
That is of correctness.
Thanks for the explanation. Now I understand a lot more. Now tell me, my friend, you said you followed an impulse track last night. What is the relevance of that?
It was the same as always, also with the retrospect. Behind the camper van corner, I could locate a male person, but he did not go there himself, but was transported there and then shot at you from there. Only a few seconds after the attack, the person was also transported away again, very far away, to where we are now. The village you see down there is called Merschville. Up to here, at an altitude of 2,000 meters, I was able to follow the impulse track that started from the camper corner at this altitude and led from here to here. And there the trace also ends abruptly, which means that once again an Earthman was hypnotically abused by the Syrian group for an assassination attempt on you, whose swinging waves were made unrecognizable to us by a deformation so that we cannot locate him. Presumably the same earthly person was always used for all assassinations on you in this regard. And since our locating devices now reach from the center to here, and we could register the vibrations of the Syrians, they must be acting against you from so far away from the center, otherwise we could locate them. And since we unfortunately had no working possibility up to now to locate also earthly persons who were transported from outside the security zone by a transmitter to your proximity, we could not save you directly from that. But such an intrusion is no longer possible now, because finally I have finished the protection module I have been working on for years. I have now inserted this module in the control organ, so that no penetration is now possible in your proximity in the mentioned form. This means that you can now at least be safe in terms of the Syrian group and their machinations, as the module has a range of 600 kilometers in a radius of around the center.
Then at least now I am completely safe from these loonies?
That is of correctness. Unfortunately, however, this does not apply to purely earthly occurrences, if this should occur, which is not to be hoped for.
Let us hope then. But still, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But dear friend, regarding the motorhome, I have to tell you that it is not one of those. The vehicle you mean is a caravan or a simple camper. A motorhome is a vehicle in which you can stay and which is self-propelled. It is therefore a motorhome. In this case, the word mobile refers to being mobile in relation to being self-mobile or self-driving. The caravan or caravan, on the other hand, is not self-mobile, but requires a towing device, which is normally an automobile.
Then I have succumbed to a misunderstanding. Thanks for your instruction. If it pleases you, we can stay here for some time and talk about personal matters.
Sure. I should then just be back at the center around 0030 HRs, because I have some urgent work to do in the office. During our conversation, we could also fly a little bit through the night area. I would also like to know how Simyai Se and all the others are doing, and if Ptah has found a highly civilized humanity in a foreign universe.
Ptah is still searching. Simya Se and all the others are doing well in every respect. And besides that, I am to greet you from her and tell you that she might be able to pay you another visit in the foreseeable future after all. Only a date for that has not yet been set. She also wants you to send her greetings to all members of the group.
This is good news. Thanks. I will convey the greetings.
Then I would like to say the following. If it should turn out that new assassination activities by the Syrian group should occur, which is now probably excluded by my new alarm module, then you would be warned automatically by an appropriate impulse, just like us. We would then be on the spot in no time, as we have a permanent presence planned for the next few years, specifically for this purpose. However, with regard to Earth-human activities, you must be careful. But now I would like to talk about the concerns of Hans-Georg, and also ask you the following, if you do not have a question yourself, which I do not accept.
Now is the time, my friend. We have to go back. But one more question. What is next in Iraq?
The American and British war troops and the loyal ones of Saddam Hussein will continue the terror underground and also openly. But now, here we are, dear friend. Look, there is Piero moving on the roof of the garage.
Yes, I see him. You could surprise him and drop me off right there by the pergola in the parking lot. I am sure he will notice me right away, because he is quite observant. Take care, my son, and see you some other time. Goodbye, my friend, and farewell.
I wish you the same. Goodbye.
Nighttime sighting.
It was one of those warm pre-summer evenings when it is still warm outside even after 22 HHRs. Pleasantly impressed by the summery scents, I walked around the center area around 22 HOHRs. Shortly after that, I met Billy in front of the entrance of the building, who seemed to be addicted to summer night muses and wanted to enjoy the fragrant night air outside. When I joined him, we talked about his next spiritual teaching letter, which, like the previous one, referred to life, dying, and death. Together we watched the starry sky, which was partly covered by dark veils of clouds. It was just 22:15 HRs when suddenly a very bright, shining, flying object appeared from the west. Orange-yellow, shining, it flew completely silently towards the east over us in the center. When I asked Billy how high the object might be flying, he said only between 1,500 and 2,000 meters, after which he corrected himself and said that he estimated the flying altitude at 1,800 to 2,000 meters on closer observation. From my point of view, this might be true, while I estimated the size of the very bright object at 15 to 20 centimeters, of course seen from a great distance. For about 112 minutes we could observe the flying object before it disappeared far to the east. The whole thing was one of many night sightings I have been able to make so far, but this flying object was one of the few that passed by at a solely low altitude in such good visibility conditions. And I remember that Billy tried to make telepathic contact with the object, but as he explained, he did not succeed. So he received no response to his call. Later, however, when Billy was picked up after 35 minutes to the 343rd contact, it turned out that the flying object was Quetzal's beam ship, which according to his information had flown over the center from west to east at exactly 2,000 meters altitude. Simya. Say Silver Star Center, 11th June 2003. Silvano Lehmann.
Afternoon observations by Bernadette Brand, Switzerland.
On the afternoon of the 31st of May 2003, a Monday, I was sitting at the computer working on the fourth block of the Pleiadian Plei-Aren contact reports. The afternoon was warm, very nice, and very quiet. While I was working, I watched Silvano walk past my room twice towards Schmidruti. I assumed he was working on the wood in the large car park out front. The first time he passed my window, it was shortly after 13:30 Artsurs. The second time it might have been around 15 HURs. I noticed that I had not seen him come back, so I assumed that he had walked underneath the shed and was returning to the house from the well. It crossed my mind that perhaps he was still doing something in the storage yard, which was a good explanation for the fact that I had not noticed him. Somewhat after 16 hours, I hear a loud shot bang, from a rifle as it seemed to me. I interrupted my work for a moment, listened and thought that probably Silvano must have returned to the house the same way as before, and now shot some animal with his hunting rifle. In any case, I was not worried any further, and as everything remained quiet, I turned back to my work. Barely 5 minutes later, Maria walked past my window towards the garden, and shortly afterwards she returned. I asked her if she knew what Silvano had shot at, and she replied that Silvano was not at the house at all, and had not shot either, but that Billy had been shot at again, and that she had been looking to see if anyone else could be seen or found. Engelbert was also on the same mission along the ravine towards the forest. In disbelief, I rose and walked behind her across the house square where, to my relief, I saw Billy standing at the top corner of the house. When I asked him, he explained that he had taken a coffee break and then wanted to go for a little walk around the house. No sooner had he turned the corner of the house than he spotted Eva's bright red Busy Lizzies and looked towards them. At the same moment, the shot cracked, and the projectile whistled a hair's breadth past his head. What surprised and worried me most was the fact that Billy explained that he had been so frightened that he had fled into the house in a flash, and that even now, a little more than a quarter of an hour later, his knees were still shaking. I would never have suspected such a reaction, which is normal for any other human, from our beloved chief, as he always remained completely cool and seemingly unaffected during all other attacks on his life, as far as I was a witness to them anyway. Billy explained to me that the shot had been fired from the direction of the chicken yard or the Russian caravan and had passed so close to his head that he had clearly felt the draft of the projectile. Together with Silvano, who had joined us in the meantime, the two of them began to search for the projectile among the bushes and in the slope's soil. I went down to the trailer, thinking to myself that the shooter could not possibly have been standing at the upper end of the chicken yard, because then he would have been clearly visible. But behind the caravan was a small space where a slender figure could well stand and hide, and the gunman, if he needed support or a foothold, found it very well at the corner of the caravan. I stood next to the suspected spot from which the assassin might have fired his shot and looked in the direction where Billy must have been standing. As I did so, the thought flashed through my mind that Billy and Silvano were probably looking too far to the left and a little too deep for the bullet, because I immediately noticed the brick archway that Volodya Kalmykov had built years ago during his holidays with us. I moved away from where I was standing and went straight to the stone arch, while saying to Billy and Silvano that I thought the shooter must have been standing behind the caravan. As soon as I stood in front of the stone arch, a spot immediately caught my eye below the second stone to the left of the arch's center stone, where a large piece of a somewhat protruding stone had obviously splintered off quite freshly. Somewhat to the lower left, at the edge of the chipped area, was a small additional dent, which obviously must have come from the impacting bullet, for it seemed to me, in a peculiarly typical manner, which I cannot, however, explain correctly, to have been squashed in some wise, much as if a piece had been hewn out with a pointed chisel, only the dent was decidedly less deep than it would have been from a chisel blow. Of course, I immediately informed Billy and Silvano of my discovery, but they remained somewhat suspicious of it for the time being. Silvano then first went down to the Russian caravan and stood where the sniper had presumably been standing, before rejoining us and then admitting that it was probably possible that the stone had been hit by the shot fired and had splintered away. Billy explained, in response to my question, that it was completely impossible and unrealistic to still want to search for the bullet and the remains of the splintered stone, as these had certainly flown off in all directions and would also not be found with great effort. Since we were also not quite sure about the shot we had heard, Silvano fetched some of his hunting rifles and fired test shots with them, whereby it turned out that what I had interpreted as a rifle shot must rather have been a shot from a large small caliber weapon. However, I was no longer present at these tests, as I had returned to my work in the meantime. On Tuesday, the 1st of June, Billy told me, when he came home from shopping with Eva, that the incident of the previous day had been followed up by a telephone call that had reached him in the early afternoon, just before he left for shopping. A man's voice with a completely foreign accent threatened him that he would be caught, whereupon he immediately hung up. That same night, Quetzal himself appeared and confirmed not only the incident that had been registered by the Pleiaren, but also our findings and reflections. He also explained that Billy's own early warning system had failed because he was suffering from a severe headache due to his heavy coding work on the writings, which is why he could not perceive the warning impulses and react to them. To the great relief of all of us, he promised to increase the protection for Billy so that such attacks could no longer be made on Billy without warning and without being heeded. Another cowardly and insidious murder attack on Billy Edward Albert Meyer. The completely unexpected and reprehensible and despicable event, staged by a man with the paltry and confused mind of a child miles behind, happened after a long break of attacks on Billy on the 3rd of June 2003, shortly after 16 degrees Celsius. On that very hot and humid Tuesday afternoon, I was working, as I had been for days, on the general renovation of our large rabbit hutch, which was in desperate need of renovation after more than 20 years. I was just about to add a cut artificial stone to the foundation wall when I heard an aggressive, poisonous whip of a shot fired close to me. Without wasting much time, I hurried up the few meters to the center's apartment building to see what was going on. I just reached the front door where I was also confronted by Billy. When I asked him who might have fired the shots, he replied with a slight shrug of his shoulders, and obviously a little startled that he would also like to know. Billy denied my assumption that perhaps Silvano was having a little shooting practice, saying that once again he had been shot at, and that Silvano was still driving the car down in the valley, and Eva was in therapy with Selina in Frauenfeld. At this moment, my wife Maria approached us, because she was also very frightened by the whipping shot, as she was looking out of the window almost in sight of the shooter at that very moment. So after a short exchange of words, we decided to take a closer look at certain points on foot, some of which were located many meters around the center, in order to be able to cut off the obviously mentally deranged perpetrator's escape route. But our intensive search, which also led us through dense young forest, was unfortunately unsuccessful even after about 30 minutes. Recorded on Friday, 13th June 2003, Engelbert Wächter, Switzerland.
Out of nowhere.
The night of the 3rd to the 4th of June 2003 was a pleasant one, which pleased me all the more because I was on night watch. It was midnight when I started my first round. I noticed that Billy was nowhere to be seen, because normally he shows up and makes sure that the night watcher has also really taken up his or her duty. Billy was also nowhere to be seen on the rounds, and there was no light on in his office. For myself, I thought that once again it was time for something interesting to happen, a night sighting, for example, or something else. At about 0:35 hours, I went up to the garage roof to observe the area a little from above. Apart from my eyes scanning the area, I also paid close attention to sounds. As I was looking north, I suddenly heard footsteps coming from the middle of the garage car park. Not footsteps approaching from far away, but footsteps coming out of nowhere and heading towards the house. With my heart pounding, I immediately turned around and shone my torch downwards, only to be relieved to see familiar outlines. Salome Billy, I called and went down the stairs to him. He greeted me and said, "I have just been teleported down from Quetzal's ship." Now I also realized how he could have appeared so suddenly out of nowhere. 6th July 2003, Piero Petrizzo.